What's going on, everybody? I just did a video about Bitcoin's bottom. So I'm not sure if you guys caught that video, but if you haven't, go ahead and check that out. But I wanted to kind of make a real quick update on that, as well as Litecoin, Ethereum. I kind of want to give my thoughts on those two coins as well, because these are like the big three: Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum. And I just wanted to touch on one thing that I left out of the last video, was this text here. So basically, if you believe that we just finished an Elliott wave, this being the fifth wave, in more of an intermediate term or intermediate scale, because I actually think this could be on a more grander scale. This could be a three wave, and on a super large scale, this could be a one wave. But if you believe that we just finished a five wave and maybe a more intermediate, which would have probably started, back here, this would be maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 up here, that ends, and then we enter a correction. So we enter our Elliott correction wave, which is an A, B, and C down here. And then basically you start a new market cycle. And one thing I wanted to note, when you're coming into this descending wedge and you're getting kind of squeezed in here, one of the reasons what happens is, generally speaking, this is a bullish pattern. And the reason why is because of supply and demand. And so 17 million coins have been produced so far. Roughly 4 million have been considered to be lost, and so they're just taken out of the supply altogether, which leaves 13 million in circulating supply. And there's been numbers that state, 50, 60, 70. I've heard numbers as high as 80% of people are not trading Bitcoin. They're just holding it for the long term. And that number probably decreases as time goes on, purely because, the more adoption, the more people are going to be using it, trading it, etc. So maybe a little more conservative would be 55 or 50, or even you could go as low as 40. But at 55%, that leaves around 5.8 million available coins to be traded on the active market. So a lot of the long-term holders, they're just holding it in their cold storage wallets, etc. And that they're not on the exchanges trading it daily and dumping it when the market gets rough like this. So basically, when the sellers are selling off, you can look at the volume, the 24-hour volume, how many coins have been bought and sold over the past 24 hours, over the past 2 weeks, over the past month. And you can look at it dating back to December 17th at our all-time high, and you can make assumptions on how many of these coins, these 5.8 million, have been sold and have been traded, and how much power do the sellers actually have at this point. And as you get closer to the apex, the less power the sellers have, due to simply supply and demand. It becomes more profitable for them at this point in time to be buying and making a profit that way, instead of short selling or selling in general. So that's one of the things I wanted to update on Bitcoin. So I personally think that this could be a bottom here. It could not be, it could continue forward and could continue down into this region even. And we could trade sideways inside of this and keep getting squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. But this volume here is pretty strong, and it seems bullish to me, but I'm not a professional, so I'm not quite sure. But that's just something I wanted to bring to light. And then I get requests on Litecoin all the time, so I'll do this one real quick. So Litecoin follows a very similar chart to Bitcoin. If you just lay them over the top of each other, they look pretty identical. And so Bitcoin has this ABC correction, and Litecoin seems to have the same sort of deal going on. So you have your A, your B, and then your C ends up here. And then I drew a tiny Elliott wave on a micro scale in here, going like your A correction up would be an Elliott wave up, and then you have another correction down, and generally your C wave here, your C correction, will have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 correction as well in it. That's the way I learned it. So I'm seeing that play out very nicely in Litecoin as well. And one reason I wanted to make this video is because we're sitting right here at about 163, 164, and we're just about to break through Litecoin's resistance level. And once we do, what I would see here is you're starting a new cycle, and so you could have a one wave, and if it doesn't break this resistance level, it'll probably drop back down somewhere in this region, and then your three wave would launch you up past this, and this line would become support. And so you could come down and probably flirt with it again down here, and then your five wave could launch up. And you could see back levels that we saw previously. Maybe not all the way. It's very difficult to tell the length of the waves. That would be a pretty long five wave, especially in coming out of a bear market. That would be pretty difficult to get that high, but you know, it's just market cycles, and you know, this could be a very micro Elliott wave going on here. So we really don't know until it plays out, but this is a good sign to me, especially all these candles in the past 4 hours have been green. So that's my Litecoin analysis for right now. I know it's not super in depth, I apologize, but it's so similar to Bitcoin, and the same applies to Litecoin, and Litecoin has a lot more supply, but at the same time, supply and demand is supply and demand across the board. So the squeeze in this region, it might pump quite a bit less because the supply is more. So maybe you'll see Bitcoin jump up a bit higher, but it's really difficult to tell. So the last one I want to go over is Ethereum, and this one has been requested a lot, and that's due to a couple of reasons. As people have been saying, Ethereum is holding its value in this correction within a certain percentage, right? So it hasn't dropped quite as much as Bitcoin or Litecoin or a lot of these other altcoins. It's hovered in it hasn't dipped much below, say, I mean, I guess it got down to 760, but the candles closed around 920. So Ethereum has been relatively steady throughout this correction, but there's a caveat, and I'm not so sure that Ethereum is done correcting yet. And the reason is we're on the day chart on this, so we're looking at a more macro scale. But if I look at the 4-hour scale, like I was with the other coins, we're seeing this. If you believe that, say you believe that this one day, that this was the Elliott correction, this was the top of your 5 wave, then you would have an ABC correction. Now, this is a really small correction, and that's possible. It's very possible. This would almost satisfy. These are very similar levels if you do the end of the candles, and if you do where the candles close, then, you know, this would be somewhat satisfactory for me. But if you bring it into a more micro scale and you look at the 4-hour chart, things start to get a little different here. And I'm not sure what's going on here, but to me, it looks like I would move this trend line, and I would say this would be our A, this would be our C, or our B, I'm sorry, and then our C wave, clearly this can't be our C wave because this is still above the end of the A, which would mean to me that we're not finished correcting in Ethereum. And this is something a lot of the Ethereum folks probably won't want to hear, but this is healthy, right? Like, you need corrections, and it's just the way the market works. So my personal thoughts is we could see Ethereum continue to correct, and the C wave would probably be quite a bit larger. And I'm just kind of throwing this thing out and around. So it's not necessarily going to be all the way down here to 500. I don't actually think it's going to go that far. But, you know, if we said around 700 or so, I could totally see it correct down that far. That would be still less percentage lost than what Bitcoin lost, what Litecoin lost, what a lot of these other altcoins lost. And then you would see, just like you see in here, with Litecoin and with Bitcoin on your C wave, your C corrective wave, you would see a 1, 2, 3, 4, and then a 5 wave. So we can draw that on our Ethereum graph. So this would be like a 1, 2, 3, and then you could have a 4 come up here and then a 5 down here somewhere. And so that's where I think we're kind of riding. I think Ethereum will probably continue to gain up to about 1,000, maybe a little lower, and then it will probably see another correction, another dip, and this is where I'm looking to target. And it might not dip this low because we have some support in this range here. We have pretty decent support in here, so I can draw that trend line. Oh, come on. All right, so we have something like this, and that would be not a terrible correction at all, actually. And that would, if we go to the end of the candles, which is what I was doing on the other coins, that would make sense. So this is what I kind of see, and if that was the case, and we're using the 1-day chart, let's zoom in here, and we can go to the end of the candlesticks here, and that would make a good amount of sense to me. Maybe around, actually I think it's going to be longer than that, you know. I think it's going to take until end of February because Ethereum seems to be lagging quite a bit behind Bitcoin. Now I could be 100% wrong, and this right here was our correction right here. This was the end, and now we're starting our, if Ethereum is this resilient, then we could be starting our next cycle, and we could have like a 1, 2, and then we could play with this up here, and then a 3, and then we could launch up here. So those are the I know this is not a ton of help, but this is just what I'm looking at. This is how I'm reading the charts right now. Ethereum is the one that kind of is an outlier. If I look at Bitcoin and Litecoin in multiple different candlestick sizes, I'm seeing pretty much the same thing. When I look at Ethereum, it's not as similar, and that's why I'm kind of making this video, is just because this is what I'm seeing. So if you guys are seeing something different, let me know in the comments below. And if you guys like this kind of video, then please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And I'll catch you guys in the next one.